welcome back to another episode of Faith in Sports. I am so excited to welcome in my guest for today, someone that I have had the opportunity to work with, but you probably know him from his awesome playing days with the University of Alabama, actually a three-time national champion, just a force to be reckoned with on the offensive line, now works as a football analyst for ESPN. Everyone welcome Barrett Jones. Hey, Barrett, how are you?
What's up? I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. This shows you that some things are bigger than sports rivalries. You know, we got faith in football here that we're talking about, and for me to be doing this interview with a hardcore Auburn girl like you, this is a major step for me.
It shows how much our faith means to us. You're absolutely right.
That's exactly right.
Barrett and I, like I said, have gotten to work together on college football. And honestly, like I'm sure you can vouch for this too, one of the coolest things about working in this industry is just the different people that you get to meet. And I've gotten to meet some really awesome people, and Barrett's certainly one of them. So I know this is going to be a great interview. But yes, we do have the Auburn, Alabama thing working against us, but we make it work. You know what I mean? You know, Barrett, like I said, you obviously had so much success on the field. We were able to see that. And football was such a huge part of your life. You don't play at the University of Alabama if it's not a huge part of your life. But I know your foundation was in something much deeper. So I would love to just hear more about that from you and kind of what role your faith played in your football career.
Yeah, great question. You know, I would say my faith, like you mentioned, it is a foundation to who I am. I feel like that's my identity as a believer. And I grew up with two awesome Christian parents who had me in church at a pretty early age. But I would say I really started my personal relationship with Christ somewhere in the middle school area where I really kind of started digging and kind of having my faith for my own. But when I got to high school, I really focused predictably so much on football. I mean, football meant so much to me, and it really, in a lot of ways, became the most important thing in my life. And when I got to Alabama, if you know anything about Alabama sports, and I know you do, Taylor, is that it's only magnified when you get to college, and in a lot of ways in the South in general, football is kind of a religion, the most important thing in a lot of people's day-to-day life. And I think it became that for me, and that it was such a focal point in my identity and who I was, that really when I thought of myself, in a lot of ways I thought of myself as a football player who happened to be a Christian. And I'll never forget, really long story short, growing up, like my very favorite game that I ever remember of college football was the 2005 Rose Bowl, where you had Vince Young in Texas playing against a lot of different Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart, Lindale White, USC. I mean, still maybe one of the greatest college football games I've ever seen. Incredible game.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I really vividly remember thinking to myself, someday I'm going to go play in the national championship. And at the end of that, Vince Young, there's this great scene where he holds up the crystal trophy. The confetti was falling down on him, and I thought to myself, I am going to do that someday. I'm going to get a chance to hold that trophy. So here we go. Fast forward, probably 5 years. And here we are. We're playing in the Rose Bowl, same game, against Texas, right? Same team I had seen against Colt McCoy. And so we go out there, and, man, I was so nervous for this game, obviously. I just, thinking about all the bad things that could happen. I'm not normally like that, but, when you're playing in front of like 50 million people, you're like,
yeah.
If I give up a sack and, everyone remembers me forever that I was the guy that ruined the game and lost the championship for us. But we got there and thankfully won the game, I think 37-21. So sure enough, after the game, everyone else was kind of running around in the stands and like hugging their parents and running and screaming. But I'm a very strategic thinker, Taylor. So I immediately ran to the front of the podium and got a front row spot because I wanted to hold the trophy. I was like, I can hug my family later. I gotta hold this trophy. Okay. And so I get there, and sure enough, Coach Saban holds the trophy. The team captains hold it. The very next guy to hold the trophy is me. Which, if you know anything about sports, it's not supposed to be team captain and then redshirt freshman right guard. Like it's supposed to be the seniors next. But I was so hungry, like I had to hold this thing. So there you go. I did it. I held the trophy. And I'll never forget, though, I got back to my hotel room later on that night and had what I can only describe as just this overwhelming sense of emptiness, of kind of having a moment where I was like, hey, what's next? Like I really accomplished every goal I had in life as a 19-year-old. And I was kind of thinking like, man, what's my purpose in life? Like this is not really that satisfying. And so at that point in my life, I had over a period of time, I would say somewhat of a recommitment to really what my purpose in life was, and just kind of decided that and discovered that in a lot of ways, even though I was a believer, I had been living my own life to glorify myself, not really to honor the Lord. And so I kind of recommitted and said, you know what, I'm going to play football. I really need to do it in a way that's going to honor the Lord. And I want to use my platform in a positive way to influence others for Christ. And I just kind of decided that instead of being a football player who happened to be a Christian, I really wanted to be a Christian who happened to play football. So.
Okay, that was such a cool story, might I add. Honestly, you know, so many times when athletes have come to that moment, it's usually after a challenge or like after an injury or a bad loss. Yours came after the ultimate success, which is actually really powerful. And I think that what I've learned through doing this series is that sports can really create such a well-rounded testimony because it gives you the opportunity to spend time on both the mountaintop and the valley. I wouldn't say you were really in the valley at Alabama, but you have definitely.
We didn't have many valleys, Taylor.
No valleys in T-Town. But I do know that any athlete has had their fair share of challenges and struggles and obstacles. And so each athlete is able to know what it means to both succeed and struggle. And if you're experiencing God in both of those, you have one heck of a testimony. So that's actually really cool to hear that that's kind of the moment when you realized, okay, my perspective needs to shift here a little bit. But what aspect of your understanding of faith and of God do you attribute to football? How do you think your time in the sport actually strengthened your relationship and your understanding of him?
Yeah, great question. You know, I think it's definitely sharpened me. I mean, I think probably the most practical way is maybe just a reliance on him. I think that in our culture today, sometimes it's easier for us to lose sight of the fact that we really need to be reliant on the Lord in a day-to-day manner. You know, like playing football, like honestly, it was so challenging and every day that I tried to be fully reliant on the Lord. And I was honestly just comparatively to a lot of the guys I was playing against, such an average athlete. I really was. And so I just kind of had to like every day understand that, you know, I really know that I can't do this, you know, without the Lord's strength and power and confidence, I guess, that he would instill in me. And so I really kind of felt like I needed to rely on God. And look, I know maybe you're listening to this and thinking like, okay, you're playing football, your problems aren't that big. I get it. And in the grand scheme of things, they're not. But when you're in it, it feels really important. And I think it kind of just taught me to not compartmentalize my life. And I think it's a journey that I'm still on, really, because it's so easy as humans to kind of just put your head down during certain parts of your life and really miss a lot of opportunities that God will put your way. You know, probably I have so many things I love about football, but one of my favorite things is just, like you mentioned, the kind of guys you get to meet from all different backgrounds. I mean, it just made me so much better as a person. But to have, you know, the mindset that I'm always looking for those opportunities and never just to put my head down, focus on myself and get to work and really kind of decompartmentalize myself to be able to see those opportunities and, you know, to hear the Lord kind of poke me and be like, hey, look, this is an opportunity. Speaking of this guy's life.
I think what you said about the reliance on God is interesting because actually some other people that I've interviewed have mentioned that too, because athletes, it's a balancing act for sure, because as an athlete, you do have to show that you're taking ownership and you're putting in this work and you're self-disciplined and you're not getting complacent. And reliance on the Lord, sometimes you feel like that's a contradiction, but it's finding the balance of the two that makes you your best athlete. So when you had that moment that you mentioned to me just about how, you know, you needed to be a Christian who played football and that perspective swing for you, after that, how did you feel like you changed as a player?
Yeah, great question. So I would say this, and this is I'm going to alert that there's a humble brag coming, and I'm really not meaning it this way, but thankfully after that, we had a chance to win 2 more championships. It was just a perfect time. 3 out of 4 years was incredible. And honestly, the other 2 were just totally different. I mean, they really were. I mean, like we won them and it was great and it was so fun. But there was just not the same kind of letdown because even though those championships were awesome, I just knew that's not where my identity was anymore. And it was really great to win. But it wasn't who I was as a person. It wasn't what I looked to for my satisfaction. And I think it's really important in life that if you're drawing all your satisfaction and identity from anything, whether it's your job or your spouse or even if there's a lot of positive things you can draw that from. If it's not the Lord, there's going to be a point where, you know, you're going to kind of come up short and fill that emptiness. I'll tell you one quick story that I think was really powerful affirmation of this is that years later, we had this junior day, and one of our strategies to get recruits at Alabama was we would let them hold the trophy. Okay, like, so, kind of get this experience of like, here's what it feels like to come play here. And someone on that day dropped one of the crystal trophies on a marble floor. It broke into a million pieces. I mean, it was everywhere on the ground. All right. And, I was in the building that day helping with recruiting, and I turned in the corner and I just see this trophy everywhere. And, I really kind of sat back and I just thought about it. And I thought, what a great picture in a lot of ways of life of here's this trophy that I worked for thousands of hours. And yet it's so fragile that someone drops it and it breaks into a million pieces. And I kind of had a flashback that night to how I felt in that hotel room, is that this is what I put all my identity into, was this trophy. And, I felt like I looked around, and even though we had won, the pieces of my life in some ways were all over the floor on the ground. It was a great reminder to me that, I believe that if you put your hope and your trust and your satisfaction, your identity in anything other than Christ, you will have a day where you look around and your life is on the ground everywhere in pieces.
100%. I want to ask you one more thing before I let you go, because you are just spitting some good stuff right now, and I'm going to take advantage of it. One thing in sports that I think can be a struggle for Christian athletes, and I would go even beyond athletes. I think people struggle with this in the broadcast world, in the coaching world. This is like a sports thing. Comparison. Because we all know comparison is the thief of joy. The Lord gave us each our own lives. We are beautifully made with intention, and we need to just be grateful for where we are, who we are, what we have. And unfortunately in sports, whether you're an athlete, a coach, in the broadcast world, you quickly look to the people next to you to see what they're doing, how they're doing, and where you match up to them. But there is an aspect that isn't avoidable in sports. I mean, like, you literally have to match up to your opponent. For you had to prepare for the D lines that you're facing. What advice would you give athletes, aspiring broadcasters, anyone in the sports world about that comparison, but in a healthy way, as to not diminish what the Lord has blessed you with?
That's a great question. Honestly, a lot of what I learned about this comes from Coach Saban. And if you heard him talk about the process, I think it applies so perfectly to the Christian life, is that it really is instead of comparing yourself to others all the time, is really setting a standard for yourself of who you are, of what you want to accomplish. His focus of that is football, right? Is that it's not about the scoreboard. It's about who we are as a team. And we don't really care, what the scoreboard says. We're going to focus on every single play and executing that play to the best of our ability. But really, it's the same way in the Christian life. And it's the same way of kind of the way you view the world, is that instead of constantly comparing yourself to others, you compare yourself to the standard. And obviously, if you're a believer, the standard is Christ. And the standard is the Bible and what it teaches about absolute truth and what we believe. And so that's got to be your standard. And if you're comparing yourself to that standard, and if that's your focus all the time, you will ultimately look back and you will see a large amount of growth. I think sometimes we, even as believers, we get really caught up in the big picture, really caught up in like all the different things we want to accomplish. And sometimes I just have to kind of refocus myself and really focus on being faithful and obedient in small increments. Even down sometimes I think about 15 minutes. I think, what I'd really love to know how this is all going to work out. But I just want to focus in this next 15 minutes that I want to be obedient and faithful to what God has called me to do. In this next conversation, in this next way I treat this person right here, I need to be faithful and obedient. And so, yes, it's a great thing to think about the big picture, but sometimes you just really need to focus on where you are right now, what God has called you to do, and focus on being faithful and obedient in that very moment, and not getting too caught up in your ranking and where you are compared to everyone else,
right?
And just at the end of the day, focus on that standard.
Oh, that's good stuff. And honestly, so timely, given the uncertainty associated with right now. I think we can all certainly take that advice and run with it. And honestly, did I think I would interview an Alabama football player and him not mention the process? No.
I had to mention at least
very
once.
Appropriate. Saban would be proud. Well, Barrett, thank
right.
you so much for sharing that word and a bit of your heart. I knew it would be a good one, but you definitely surpassed expectation. That was awesome.
It's crazy times for sure. And I appreciate you having me on. And thanks for what you're doing. This is a really cool series, and looking forward to seeing the rest of them.
Thank you so much, Barrett. We'll talk soon.